Welcome back to America's Commercial Real Estate Show. I'm Michael Ball. This segment is brought to you by Xceligent, building data everywhere. Visit xceligent.com. Today we're talking about medical office buildings, healthcare real estate. Please welcome my next guest. It's Paul Zeman. Paul is president of Healthcare Real Estate Services. He's also a partner of the firm of Bull Realty. Paul, thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon.
Well, Paul, one of the things that we were talking with Jim about was some of the cap rates that he's seeing around the country for medical office buildings, and we always kind of talk about kind of averages of cap rates. So I think the listeners are aware of that. We're talking averages of all kinds of buildings. So and he mentioned 7% cap range. So what are you seeing on some of the different styles, types, and sizes of medical office buildings for cap rates?
Well, I would agree with Jim that cap rates are 7% across the board if we consider all medical office buildings, but I tend to play in the $5 million and greater sector. Mm-hmm. And when we start looking at $5 million and greater, we're more in the mid sixes, 6.5, maybe 6.4.
Okay. And what if you have an institutional quality building that's $80 million with great leases in a great area?
The trophy assets, mm-hmm. The portfolios that I sell, mm-hmm. they're going to trade a lot more aggressively. I've seen offers on properties in the low 5 cap range. Mm-hmm. On the other side of the coin, some of the buildings that are further from campus, maybe not as much hospital sponsorship, very well could trade in the low to mid 7s.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So you're still getting in the 7s, even if it's a suburban office building.
Yeah, it very well could be. I recently closed a $17 million transaction out in Athens, Georgia, that had some hospital sponsorship. Mm-hmm. It was a condo situation, and it was still a 7.0 cap.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So what are you seeing for occupancy and vacancy in the medical office building world?
Vacancy continues to drive itself down into the single digits, mm-hmm. which is significantly lower than we've seen in a long time, and is just as a result of the supply and demand equation. We've seen rental rates continue to increase.
Yeah, well, that's good for the medical office building investors. So you're talking to people who own medical office buildings every day, and they're buying them every day and selling them. So what are you hearing from these folks about Obamacare and the Trumps, and everyone's talking about repeal and replace of Obamacare? Do they have any concerns about the healthcare insurance market moving forward for their tenants?
I haven't seen that. I think as far as the investors go, whether they're institutional investors or private equity or high net worth individuals, they know there's going to be a need for healthcare. Where I have seen some conversations and some shift is in the length of the leases that are getting executed. A lot of times now, if a large health system leases a lot of space, especially in an off-campus building, they're typically going to lease for the amount of time that matches up well, like to their employed physicians' contracts, just to kind of hedge a little bit.
Yeah. So no one's that you're dealing with is saying, "Hey, I'm concerned that the healthcare debacle is going to create some challenges for my tenants."
No, not really. And in fact, I even asked a buyer that I had a transaction under contract with during the election, said, does it dissuade you or persuade you whether it's going to be, Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? And the answer was an emphatic no. We buy medical office buildings for a living. That's what we do.
Yeah.
So their strategy wasn't going to change one way or the other.
Yeah. Well, gee, on the outside looking in, if you're out there, you may think that, wow, with the baby boomers all coming of age, you would think there's going to be a lot of need for services, and it'll be paid for some way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We've always had an issue. I remember 15 years ago, it was HMOs. We're just eating the doctors alive, and that seemed like a little bump in the road, but at the time, it was like a major crisis.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's talk about certificates of need, because you're selling buildings all over the country in different states. So if you're an investor and you're looking at a building where some of the major tenant in the building has a CON, how does that impact the stability of that tenant in that investment property?
You know, it's going to vary state to state, but I've always said that a CON is a landlord's best friend. It really, some people would argue it restricts free trade, which it does. You and I could not go open an imaging center or a surgery center tomorrow if we wanted to without jumping through the hoops to get it done. But it's going to vary by state. I think that, like here in Georgia, I think that Georgia is the second toughest state in the nation, second only to North Carolina in terms of CON. And whether you're talking imaging center or surgery center or a new wing on the hospital, it could sort of get almost dumbed down to some states. It's more of a rubber stamp. But in the tougher CON states, it's a huge benefit to the landlord to have a tenant who's under CON.
Yeah, so certificate of need. So have you even seen some cases where someone's trying to get a certificate of need and some of the existing players in the marketplace, some of their competitors, are actually fighting it?
They always fight it. It's commonplace that if somebody files a certificate of need, again, I'll go back to imaging. Some of the physician practices in town, and even a lot of the folks that don't even have their own imaging equipment, will file an appeal with the state. So it's a battle. It's a battle. But not only is it a battle for somebody to get a CON, but if you're thinking about them moving a surgery center or moving an imaging center, it is not always economically feasible. A good imaging center is going to bill out $50,000 to $100,000 a day. Well, after you're done fighting maybe $1 million legal battle to get to move down the street, you maybe had your center shut down for 30 days while it was moving, and the financial impact is such that it's just easier to renew your lease and stay where you are, and that's what happens most of the time.
Yeah. One thing I think is interesting about medical office buildings is there's less of them. I mean, it's not really a big market. I mean, you look at the office market is huge. So if someone's been in the office sector, owning office buildings, and they're thinking about MOBs, what's different? What should they think about? What should they watch out for?
Well, like we said before, medical office is just really complicated office.
Yeah.
When tenants do roll over in medical buildings, it's more expensive to replace them, and in terms of build out, just in terms of the cost of plumbing and electrical is typically a lot greater in a medical office building than it is in an office building. And that's why I think the primary reason that cap rates have typically been a little bit less in office buildings than they are in medical office buildings.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, great information, Paul. Thanks for joining us.
Always love being here.
All right. If you'd like more information from Paul Zeman, you can find his information at bullrealty.com. And thanks for joining us out there on iTunes, YouTube, radio stations, however you're reaching us. Thanks for being with us. Until next week, be sure that you always lead, learn, and laugh, and join us for America's Commercial Real Estate Show.